Miguel sliced the colorful peppers with almost automatic precision, the rhythmic sound of the knife against the wooden cutting board filling the heat of the kitchen of O Legado restaurant. The scent of garlic and olive oil already hung in the air, a promise of the lunch that would soon be served. Sitting on a low stool in the safest corner he had arranged for her, 7-year-old Sofia was trying to piece together a kitten puzzle. Her small shoulders were hunched, and a lock of dark hair fell. Over her focused eyes. He watched her out of the corner of his eye, making sure she was okay. Since her mother passed away 6 months ago, the kitchen had become her refuge, and he, the head chef, her safe haven. The metal door creaked open, making Sofia shrink back into her seat. It was her aunt's. Beatriz, the oldest, with her impeccably tied hair and a perpetually dissatisfied expression, crossed her arms at the sight. Helena, always a step behind, forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "This is no place for a child, Miguel. Kitchens are dangerous, germ-ridden environments," Beatrice said, her voice sharp. Miguel stopped what he was doing, wiped his hands on his apron, and replied calmly, without looking away. "She's safe here with me, Mrs. Beatrice. Her father, Mr. Felipe, knows and allows it." Helena then approached Sofia, ignoring Miguel. "Honey, you don't belong with the servants. Let's go to the living room. Your cousins are coming." Sofia clutched a puzzle piece tightly. Her knuckles turning white. She didn't look at Helena, keeping her eyes fixed on the floor. "I want to stay with Uncle Miguel," she whispered, her voice so low it could barely be heard. Miguel stepped forward, subtly positioning himself between the girl and the two women. He could feel her trembling even without touching her. "Ladies, please. She's fine. Mr. Felipe will be here for lunch soon and can take her. There's no need to force the situation and make her uncomfortable." Beatrice let out a short, humorless laugh. "Uncomfortable? Uncomfortable is seeing my brother's daughter being raised in a restaurant kitchen as if she had no family or a decent home." The tension in the kitchen rose, and the other two cooks, who had previously worked in silence, now moved with deliberate slowness, aware of the argument. Miguel felt their gazes, a mixture of curiosity and pity. He ignored Beatrice's provocation, his focus entirely on protecting the girl from that poison. "With all due respect, Ms. Beatrice, the only home Sofia knows now is where her father is, and while he works, my duty is to make sure she feels safe. Those are his orders." The word orders seemed to irritate the sisters even more. Helena tugged on Beatrice's arm, who glared at Miguel. "Never mind, Beatrice. We'll settle this with Felipe later." "You'll see," she said, the veiled threat hanging in the air before they turned and left, leaving a heavy silence behind. As soon as the door closed, Sofia's body relaxed, as if a thread holding her tense had been cut. She released the puzzle piece and looked at Miguel, her eyes wide and moist. He knelt beside her, the scent of spice clinging to his clothes mingling with the air. He said nothing, just took her small hand and gave it a gentle squeeze. It was their code, their silent way of saying, "It's okay. I'm here." She squeezed back, a tiny gesture, but one that carried the weight of the trust she placed in him. He then took a fresh strawberry he had saved, cut it into small pieces and offered it to her. Sofia ate slowly, the sweetness of the fruit seeming to dissolve some of the bitterness left by her aunts. Shortly after, the door opened again, but this time the sound was different, softer. It was Felipe, Sofia's father. a man with broad shoulders but a weariness evident in his eyes. He smiled when he saw his daughter, a genuine smile that lit up his face. "How are you, my champion? Finishing the puzzle?" Sofia ran to hug him, burying her face in his lap. Miguel stood and nodded to his boss. "She was fine, Mr. Felipe. A little quiet, but she behaved as always." Felipe looked at him gratefully, a deep understanding passing between the two men. He knew Miguel was more than an employee. He was his daughter's guardian of peace in those difficult times. Felipe sat on the stool next to his daughter, helping her fit a difficult piece of the puzzle together. "Did Uncle Miguel take good care of you?" he asked, his voice low and affectionate. Sofia nodded. Vigorously, her eyes never leaving the kitten's drawing. "He gave me strawberries," she said, as if it were the greatest secret. Felipe smiled and looked at Miguel, who had returned to his place preparing the dishes. "Thank you, Miguel. Really. I don't know what we would do without you." Before Miguel could respond, Beatriz and Helena re-entered the kitchen, this time with a confrontational stance. They had been waiting for Felipe to arrive to launch their attack. "Felipe, we need to have a..." "Serious talk. Now," Beatrice said, completely ignoring the girl's presence. The atmosphere changed instantly. Felipe stood up, placing himself in front of Sofia like a shield. "What's wrong? Can't you wait until the end of the workday?" Helena intervened, her tone falsely concerned. "It's about Sofia, dear. We don't think it's appropriate for her to spend the day here. This man," she said, pointing at Miguel dismissively, "may be a good cook, but he's not qualified to care for a child. She needs a familiar environment, adequate stimulation, not the smell of grease and chatter of servants." Miguel continued his work, his blood boiling, but he kept his expression neutral. He wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing him react. Felipe sighed, the weariness on his face deepening. "We've already talked about this, Beatriz. The restaurant is mine. I'm here. And Miguel is completely trustworthy." The mention of trust seemed to further inflame his sister. "Trust? Felipe, you're blinded by..." "Convenience. You leave your daughter in the care of a stranger all day. What do you know about his life? About who he really is? Just today we treated him with due distance, and he was insolent. He responded to us as if he were in charge, not us. This shows a lack of respect, a lack of awareness of his place." Each word was a stone thrown, intended to undermine the solid relationship Felipe and Miguel had built. Sofia, sensing the hostility in her aunt's voice, began to tremble again. She dropped the puzzle and gripped her father's leg tightly. Miguel saw the movement and his heart sank. He knew the argument wasn't about him, but about control. The aunts wanted to dictate how their niece should be raised, and he was merely an obstacle in their way. Felipe looked at his daughter, then at his sisters, conflict etched on his face. "He wasn't insolent. He was protecting my daughter, which is exactly what I ask him to do. His place is where I determine, and I trust him with what I..." "Hold most, dear." The firmness in Felipe's voice surprised the sisters, who exchanged a quick, furious glance. Clara, the waitress who had worked with Miguel for years, entered the kitchen to take an order and paused for a moment, feeling the electricity in the air. She took in the scene. The boss's two sisters with their expensive clothes and sour expressions, and Miguel, standing quietly, but with a rigid posture she knew well. It was his "I'm holding on tight" posture. Clara also saw little, Sofia clinging to her father, her face hidden. She didn't need to hear the conversation to understand what was happening. Since Sofia's mother's death, the aunt's visits had become synonymous with tension. They always found something to criticize, and their favorite target was Miguel. Clara picked up the tray with the dishes, her movements agile and silent. As she passed Miguel, she gave him a quick but meaningful look, a look that said, "I see what they're doing." He noticed and relaxed his shoulders a fraction. He wasn't entirely alone in this silent battle. Clara left for the dining room, but the image lingered in her mind. She decided to keep an eye on him. She knew Miguel well enough to know he was incapable of any rudeness. He was a kind, patient man, and the way he cared for Sofia was a dedication that went far beyond professional obligation. Someone had to be on his side. Defeated by Felipe's firmness, the sisters left the kitchen and sat at the best table in the restaurant. In full view of everyone. Lunch began to be served, and the kitchen entered its frenetic rhythm. Miguel prepared a special dish for Sofia, a grilled fish fillet with star-shaped mashed potatoes and broccoli that looked like small trees. He knew she loved it. He placed the dish on a tray and asked Clara to take it to Felipe's table, who was now sitting with his daughter in the dining room. On the way, Helena stood up abruptly, pretending to go to the bathroom, and accidentally bumped into Clara. The tray shook, and some of the tomato sauce that accompanied another dish splashed onto Sofia's mashed potatoes. "Oh my God, how clumsy," Helena exclaimed with theatrical concern. "Clara, you need to be more careful. You almost ruined my niece's lunch." Clara, holding the tray firmly, knew the bump had been intentional. She felt the calculated shove. She looked at Helena, who had a victorious gleam in her eyes, and then at Sofia's plate. Red sauce stained the star-shaped mashed potatoes. It was a small, almost childish act of sabotage, but the goal was clear: to create a problem, to make it seem like the kitchen was careless and that Miguel wasn't paying enough attention. Clara took a deep breath, composed herself, and continued her way to Felipe's table. Upon reaching the table, Clara apologized to Felipe for the minor accident, explaining what had happened with studied neutrality. "Mr. Felipe, I apologize. There was a slight bump, and sauce from another dish spilled here." Beatrice from the next table commented loudly for everyone to hear. How unprofessional. A child's food should be served separately with more care. Felipe looked at the plate, then at Clara, and simply said, "It's okay, Clara. Accidents happen." But Clara saw the seed of doubt being planted. She returned to the kitchen, her heart pounding with anger. She went straight to Miguel, who was finishing another order. "Miguel," she said softly, "it wasn't an accident. Miss Helena bumped into me on..." "Purpose. I felt it." Miguel stopped what he was doing and looked at her. He didn't look surprised, just tired. He nodded, silently thanking her for confirming his suspicion. "I know, Clara. Thank you for letting me know." Her validation, however, lit a protective flame within him. It wasn't just about him anymore. They were using the food, the care he took, to get at the girl. He glanced into the dining room through the small service window and saw Sofia staring at the plate with the smeared mashed potatoes, her little face confused. That small act of cruelty was crueler than any direct insult. The lunch rush arrived, and the restaurant filled up. The clatter of cutlery, conversation, and the sound of the kitchen working at full steam created a chaotic and familiar symphony. Felipe tried to maintain a normal conversation with his daughter, but it was impossible to ignore the conspicuous presence of his sisters at the next table. They spoke in slightly raised voices, commenting on the decor, the other diners, but always with a veiled hint about their niece's situation. "A girl needs strong female role models, doesn't she, Helena?" Beatrice said, glancing at Felipe. Meanwhile, in the kitchen, Miguel commanded his team with impressive calm. He moved fluidly between the hot pots and the dishes being assembled, his mind focused on every detail. But beneath the surface, concern for Sofia was a constant current. With each dish he sent out, he wondered what else they could try. He felt the gazes of his team, Clara's silent solidarity, but also the weight of responsibility. He wasn't just the head chef. That day, he was the protector of a 7-year-old girl against a subtle, persistent evil that was difficult to combat. Sofia barely touched the fish. She poked at the stained mashed potatoes with her fork, her appetite gone. Felipe, sensing his daughter's sadness, set his own plate aside. He called her over and began to tell a story softly, about a magical cook who transformed vegetables into enchanted creatures. Gradually, a small smile appeared on Sofia's face. Across the room, through the service window, Miguel watched the scene. He saw Felipe's effort, and the way Sofia's smile, however small, seemed to ease the tension in her father's shoulders. In that moment, there was no restaurant, no aunts, just a father and daughter trying to find a moment of peace. Seeing that Sofia wouldn't eat the main course, Miguel took action. He picked a single raspberry, large and red, and speared it on a long toothpick. With a small knife, he made delicate cuts, transforming the fruit into a small rose. He handed it to Clara. "Take this to her, discreetly." Clara understood. She approached Felipe's table and, with a knowing smile at Sofia, handed her the raspberry rose. The girl's eyes widened in surprise and delight. She took the fruit and ate it with a delight she hadn't shown all lunch. Felipe looked toward the kitchen, and his eyes met Miguel's. A simple, gesture, but one that spoke volumes about who truly cared about his daughter's happiness. The raspberry rose seemed to break Sofia's spell of sadness. However, the calm was short-lived. Helena, seeing that Felipe's attention was focused on her daughter, got up and walked over to their table. "That's so cute," she said, looking at the empty toothpick in Sofia's hand. "But honey, you can't just eat fruit. I brought you a little sweet treat, one your mother loved." Before Felipe could intervene, Helena pulled a small chocolate bonbon filled with nuts from her bag and offered it to Sofia. The girl, still enchanted by the previous gesture, accepted it without hesitation and took a bite. Felipe frowned. "Helena, she can't eat nuts. You know she has a mild allergy." The reaction was almost immediate. Sofia began coughing, a dry, insistent cough. Her breathing became a little labored, and small red spots began to appear on her neck. Panic gripped Felipe's face. Beatrice and Helena stood up, hands on their faces, exclaiming how they hadn't known the allergy was so serious. Miguel, who had been watching from the kitchen, didn't hesitate. He dropped the pot, shouted for his second-in-command to take over, and ran into the living room. He brushed past Felipe, who was paralyzed, and knelt in front of Sofia. "Sofia, take a deep breath with me slowly. Remember our exercise? Like the balloon," he said, his voice firm and incredibly calm. Miguel guided Sofia through the breathing. exercise, his calming presence cutting through the panic that was beginning to set in around the table. He asked Clara to bring a glass of cold water and a damp cloth. As the girl drank the water in small sips, he applied the cloth to her neck, which seemed to soothe the redness. Felipe, finally coming out of his shock, knelt beside him, his hand on his daughter's shoulder. "Her pump. It's in her bag, in my office," he said, his voice trembling. "You won't need it, Mr. Felipe. It's a mild." Reaction. The shock was worse. "She just needs to calm down," Miguel replied, without taking his eyes off Sofia, who was already breathing more easily. It was then that Clara approached Felipe, her face serious. "Mr. Felipe, excuse me," she said, her voice low but firm enough for only him to hear. "I heard you warning your sisters about Sofia's allergy this morning in the kitchen. When they arrived, they knew." The information fell like a bombshell in the tense silence. Felipe lifted his gaze. From his daughter's face to his sister's, Beatrice and Helena stood there, pale, trying to look concerned. But Clara's revelation painted the scene with a much darker hue. It hadn't been an oversight. It had been, at best, a cruel negligence, at worst, a deliberate act. Felipe's world seemed to spin in slow motion. Clara's voice echoed in his mind. They knew. He glanced at Miguel, who was still on the floor, wiping Sofia's face with the damp cloth, completely focused on the girl's well-being. Then he looked at his sisters, who were now looking away, unable to meet his. The truth was ugly, undeniable. Their concern was a sham, the intervention sabotage. All the drama of the day, the insistence, the criticism, the spoiled food, it all fit into a sickening pattern of manipulation. He slowly stood up, cold anger replacing panic. The patrons at nearby tables who had watched the incident with concern now watched with silent curiosity. The family drama was unfolding in public. Felipe picked Sofia up. She was already calm, her face nestled securely against his shoulder. He walked to the table where his sisters were sitting. His voice, when he spoke, was low, but carried an authority they hadn't heard in a long time. "You two, in my office, now." It wasn't a request. It was an order. Without looking back, he walked toward the back of the restaurant, leaving a trail of shocked looks and two pale women who had no choice but to follow him. Miguel watched Felipe walk away with Sofia in his arms and felt a wave of relief and apprehension. The immediate danger to the girl had passed, but the real storm was just beginning. He stood, his knee joints cracking, and returned to the kitchen. The respectful silence of his team was a balm. No one asked questions. They simply returned to their work, giving him the space he needed. He washed his hands, the mechanical act helping to calm his nerves. He wasn't family. He was an employee. But what would happen in that closed room? Would directly impact the little life he worked so hard to protect. In the office, a small functional room at the back of the restaurant, Felipe sat Sofia down in his leather chair, handing her a pad of paper and pencil to distract her. Then he turned to his sisters, who entered hesitantly and closed the door behind them. He crossed his arms, his face a mask of disappointment. "I want an explanation," he said, his voice controlled, which made it even more menacing. "And I don't want lies. I don't want excuses. I want the truth. Why did you give my daughter nuts when you knew she was allergic?" Beatrice tried to take the lead, as she always did, wearing a mask of indignation. "Felipe, how can you accuse us of something so horrible? It was an accident. In the confusion, in the stress, I simply forgot. We would never hurt our own niece. The lie was so blatant that Felipe felt nauseous. He didn't flinch. He kept his gaze fixed on her, waiting. Seeing that her sister wasn't convincing, Helena tried a different approach, that of the victim. We just wanted to please her, Felipe. We saw that she wasn't eating, that she was sad. It was a gesture of love, a thoughtless gesture perhaps, but with the best of intentions. Intentions? Felipe repeated, his voice rising for the first time. Your intention since you arrived here today has been to undermine my authority, disrespect a man I trust, and worst of all, upset my daughter. You complained, intrigued, sabotaged her meal, and when none of that worked, you put her at risk. Not out of love, but out of pure selfishness. Because you can't stand the idea that an employee could give her the peace and security that you, with all your money and status, can't. Sofia, in the corner, stopped drawing and looked at her father, her eyes wide, absorbing the strength emanating from him. Felipe's words hung in the air, heavy and irrefutable. Beatrice opened her mouth to protest, but no sound came out. For the first time, she seemed to have run out of arguments. The accusation of selfishness hit her hard, because deep down she knew it was true. Miguel's influence over Sofia, and consequently over Felipe, was an affront to her sense of family hierarchy. She, the eldest sister, the surrogate matriarch, was being overshadowed by a cook. It was intolerable. But admitting it out loud was impossible. Their silence was the most eloquent confession Felipe could have received. He walked to his desk and picked up the phone. You gave me what I needed, he said without looking at them. He dialed a number. Clara, please ask Miguel to come to my office and bring Sofia a glass of orange juice. The request was calm, almost casual, but the meaning was profound. He was bringing Miguel into the center of the discussion, not as an accused, but as a witness, an ally. He was elevating his status from employee to someone whose opinion mattered. The two sisters looked at each other, panic beginning to set in. The situation was spiraling completely out of their control. Miguel entered the office a few minutes later, bringing the juice himself in a straw-filled glass. He handed it to Sofia, who smiled at him, and then stood by the door, waiting. His presence changed the dynamic of the room. He didn't say a word, but his calm and dignity were a stark contrast to the nervousness of the two sisters. Felipe gestured for him to come closer. Miguel, I asked you to come because I need you to hear what I have to say. And I want them, he said, looking at the sisters, to hear it too. He turned to Miguel. Today you showed more common sense, care, and love for my daughter than her own family. You protected her, calmed her, and knew exactly what to do when she needed help. While they, Felipe's voice hardened, only brought chaos and danger. He then addressed Beatriz and Helena. Starting today, things will change. Your opinion on how I raise my daughter is no longer welcome. Your visits to the restaurant are suspended for the time being. You will only see Sofia when I decide, and under my supervision. Felipe's statement was like a blow. Suspend visits? You can't forbid us from seeing our niece, Beatrice exclaimed, her voice high-pitched with disbelief. Not only can I, but I will, Felipe replied adamantly. Until you both understand that Sofia's well-being comes before your pride and need for control. She is not a pawn in the family's power struggle. She is a child who lost her mother and needs Peace, not poison. The word poison made Helena recoil, as if physically struck. She looked at Miguel, the target of so much contempt, who remained silent, watching. Miguel felt like an intruder in an intense family drama, but he understood why Felipe wanted him there. His presence was living proof of the accusation. He was the problem they had created, and now he was witnessing the solution. He felt no triumph, only a deep sadness for Sofia, who had to live amidst this dysfunction. He looked at the girl, who was now calmly drinking her juice, oblivious to the sentence her father was passing. Her resilience was the only thing that mattered. Felipe was finally building a wall to protect her, and Miguel was one of the cornerstones of that wall. "This is absurd, Felipe. We are your family," Helena insisted, tears welling in her eyes, a last-ditch attempt to appeal to her emotions. But Felipe wouldn't give in. The incident with the nuts had permanently broken something inside him. Family doesn't put a child at risk to prove a point. Family doesn't sabotage the happiness of those they claim to love. Today you crossed a line, and I need to protect my daughter from you. He walked to the door and opened it, a clear invitation for them to leave. The finality in his gesture was unmistakable. Beatriz, realizing the battle was lost, composed herself with fragile dignity. She gave Miguel one last look of pure contempt, as if he were solely to blame for her humiliation. Then she pulled Helena by the arm, and the two of them walked out the door, leaving the office and crossing the now quieter restaurant under the curious gazes of the few remaining customers. The sound of their hurried footsteps on the wooden floor was the only answer. When the front door closed behind them, a deep, restorative silence fell over the small office. The silence that followed wasn't empty, but filled with meaning. Felipe ran his hand through his hair, exhausted, as if he'd fought a physical battle. He looked at Miguel, and for the first time that day, the barrier between employer and employee completely disappeared. They were just two men, bonded by concern for a young girl. "Miguel, I'm so sorry you had to go through this. All of this." His voice was hoarse with emotion. Miguel just shook his head. "You don't need to apologize. I just care that she," he said, nodding his chin at Sofia, "is okay." Sofia, having finished her juice, slipped from her chair and walked over to Miguel, hugging his leg as naturally as she had hugged her father earlier. The simple, spontaneous gesture sealed the day's outcome. She didn't see uniforms or social standing. She saw security. She saw affection. Felipe watched the scene, a sad, grateful smile on his face. "She chose her side," he said, more to himself than to Miguel, and she couldn't have chosen better. In that moment, he understood that the family he needed to build wasn't defined by blood ties, but by bonds of trust and genuine care. Felipe crouched down, bringing himself to their level. "Miguel, I know you work in the kitchen, but I'd be lying if I said you're just my chef. You've been a pillar for us. I can't ask you to take on a responsibility that isn't yours, but the truth is, Sofia needs you. We need you." It was a confession of vulnerability, an acknowledgement that he couldn't do it all alone. It was also an offer, an invitation for Miguel to be a more official, more integrated part of their lives. Beyond the walls of the kitchen, Miguel looked at Felipe's face, then at the top of Sofia's head, where she was still cuddled against him. He thought of his own life, simple and lonely. Caring for Sofia had filled a void he hadn't even known existed. It wasn't a burden, it was a gift. Mr. Felipe, he began, his voice firm. Caring for Sofia has never been an obligation for me. It's an honor. Whatever you need, whatever she needs, I'll be here. You don't even have to ask. The words were simple. But the commitment was immense. In that small office, a new family structure was quietly being formed. The rest of the afternoon passed in an almost surreal calm. The restaurant emptied, the kitchen staff began the final cleanup, and the sounds of heavy work were replaced by quieter conversations and the soft clink of utensils being put away. Felipe decided to close early. He needed the time. He sat with Sofia and Miguel at one of the empty tables in the dining room, the late afternoon light. Streaming through the windows and painting the room with golden hues. They didn't say much. They just sat there together, putting together the puzzle of the kitten Sofia had abandoned hours before. Each piece that fell into place felt like a small step toward normality, or rather, a new kind of normal. Clara walked past them to say goodbye, giving Miguel a warm smile and Sofia a wink. Her complicity had been a small anchor in the midst of the storm. When the puzzle was finally completed, Sofia clapped her hands proudly. The kitten smiled at them from the completed image. It was a domestic, simple scene, taking place in the middle of an empty restaurant. And yet, it felt like the most appropriate place in the world for them to be. As the sun began to set, Felipe stood up. "Shall we go home, dear?" Sofia yawned and nodded, her eyes heavy with sleep. While Felipe packed her things into a small backpack, Miguel began carefully disassembling the puzzle to put it back in the box. Sofia watched him and said sleepily, "Uncle Miguel, can you come over for dinner tonight?" The request was so direct and unexpected that it took both men by surprise. Felipe stopped what he was doing and looked at Miguel, a smile forming on his lips. He said nothing, leaving the decision to his friend. Miguel felt his heart warm. It was more than an invitation to dinner. It was an invitation to enter, to cross the final boundary between the professional and the personal. It was Sofia's final. Acceptance, confirmation that he belonged in her world, not just the world of the kitchen. He looked at the girl, whose hopeful eyes never left his. "Of course I can, little one," he replied, his voice soft. "I'd love to." The joy on Sofia's face was the most precious reward he could ever receive. The three of them left together through the back door of the restaurant, the same door the aunts had entered hours earlier, bringing tension and conflict. But now, the night air was cool and clean. The street was quiet. Felipe placed his hand on Miguel's shoulder as they walked toward the car. "Thank you, Miguel. For today, for everything." There were no more formalities, no more Mr. Felipe. There was only gratitude. "We thank you," Miguel replied, and the "we" sounded natural, including himself in this newly formed family unit. In the car, Sofia fell asleep in the back seat, her head resting against the window, her face serene. The day had been an emotional roller coaster for her, but it ended peacefully. As Felipe drove through the bright city streets, he and Miguel talked quietly, not about the drama with his sisters, but about simple things: the soccer team, the new movie showing, their plans for the following week's menu. It was an easy conversation, like that of friends. The tension of the day had dissipated, leaving behind something stronger, more solid. When they arrived at Felipe's apartment, Miguel helped carry Sofia, who was fast asleep, to bed. He covered her with the duvet and stood for a moment watching her breathe, her chest rising and falling gently. All the chaos of that day was worth it for that moment of tranquility. In the kitchen, as they prepared a simple snack, Felipe looked at Miguel and said, "You know, today I realized that legacy isn't just the name of the restaurant. It's what we build for the ones we love. And you, my friend, are part of the legacy I want to leave for my daughter." Those words sealed the day's transformation. Miguel was no longer just the cook, the employee, the temporary caregiver. He was part of the foundation of that small family. He was Uncle Miguel. As they ate in silence in Felipe's kitchen, a setting so different from the hustle and bustle of the restaurant, they both knew, without needing to say it, that nothing would be the same again. That day of conflict hadn't broken them. On the contrary, it had forged the bonds between them into something unbreakable. Injustice had revealed the truth, and the truth was that love and loyalty had found a home there.